Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in. I know we already have about 100 of you, or maybe even more, that have been waiting in the wings to come in. So as you join on, we welcome you here to another session here with Sarah. And we continue to learn from some real innovators in the business community. My name is Jenny Anchondo, and I'm here as your moderator each week. And so what I'll be doing is fielding questions in the chat and then also taking notes in the presentation so that we can have a meaningful discussion afterwards. The presenter today is the second week of Javier Hernandez. Good to see you, Javier. I'm glad you're here. Let me brag on you a little bit and remind everybody why you were chosen to be here for today. So specifically, we are talking about critical path decision making. This is something that can be one of those make it or break it things for business people. Now, last week, he talked about time management for business people. This week, we go into critical path decision making. And just so you have some context about where he's coming from and the expertise he brings, he is a veteran entrepreneur who has built 9 ventures of his own. He's said 6 successful exits, 1 that's ongoing, 2 that have been major lessons learned for him. And so he's coming to all of us with a wealth of knowledge about what works, what maybe doesn't work and you need to pivot on, what to leave behind. He has a relentless commitment to relationship building and helping other business owners to navigate the sometimes dangerous waters of entrepreneurship. Javier is somebody who is respected, not just locally, but globally. He is known as an innovator. He's known as a problem solver. He's worked in, get this, 72 countries across 4 continents and 50 states. And when it comes to volume of companies, he's not new at this at all. He has helped 300 companies and not-for-profits to advance their mission. So we all stand to learn a lot from him, no matter where you are in the business world. If you are just getting started or if you've been in it for a while, there's certainly something you can learn today during this discussion about critical path decision making. So a couple things. Actively engage with Javier when he is speaking, because what he's going to be putting forth is a presentation. And if something comes up that's you wonder, okay, I think I need to learn more on that, or can you help me with a specific example for my business? Do not be shy about posting it in the chat. Or if you don't want it put out publicly, you can send it to me directly or send it to Sarah directly, and we'll be able to get your question asked. So first big chunk of time here is going to be Javier presenting, and then we're going to have some Q&A. So write those questions in. I will be taking notes right along with you, and then we'll join back together. Without further ado, Javier Hernandez, take it away. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Great to see you too, Jenny. I'm so happy to and honored to be invited back and have an opportunity to just kind of share a little bit about those pitfalls, the lessons learned, hopefully so that as I impart some of these lessons learned to you, you're not having to learn them the hard way. You can learn them from the expertise of others, from the experiences of others, and it's not all just kind of my mistakes, my successes. It also has a lot to do with those of others that I've observed as well. So yes, that's a lot of what we have to do, because as entrepreneurs, one of the most difficult things of being an entrepreneur is how lonely it feels, because it seems like no one else can really relate to you. You're having to take these decisions, you're having to go through this process, and everything rides ultimately on you. And so it can feel stressful, painful, lonely. But I want you to know, everybody listening, everybody out there, you're definitely not alone. There's many of us, around you, in the business and in the entrepreneur community, going through many of the same things. So as Jenny said, please don't be shy about questions. Don't be shy about raising hands. Don't be shy about giving your perspective on how things have gone, because we all stand to learn from one another. But I'm going to share a little bit with you about some of what I've learned here so far. So this topic is about critical path decision making. In critical path decision making, well, there's a lot of great stories out there about how decisions are made, great decisions, bad decisions. But I want to share with you a little bit about one of the decisions that influenced me, and how it highlighted and came out as it turned out to be part of my critical path. And that was years ago. I had I had a business partner in one of the ventures that I'd started that we were going along, doing great. Happened to be a little telecommunication and technology kind of venture. We were going great, and unexpectedly, my business partner's spouse dies from cancer. Very young, very sad, tragic. And my business partner said, I don't want to mourn. I don't want to have time to mourn. I want to just bury myself in the work, and I want to just drive forward to try to drive out this emotion that that is hitting me because of it. And myself, still being fairly inexperienced, kind of young, I said, you know what? I'm a type A personality. You're a type A personality. Let's just go for it. Let's drive hard. And we did that. I drove us hard through projects and planning and work and implementations and everything that we had going on. And he did not have a chance to mourn. And it was working right up until he had a catastrophic breakdown. And he one day, he didn't even tell me, he just left. He just abandoned and couldn't deal with it, couldn't cope with it, just couldn't do any more having to do with business and work. He just had to step out and go deal with himself, what he was dealing with. And shortly thereafter, that business had to fold. That was one of those two that hard lessons that I bring with me. That decision-making process did not account for the humanity of it all. It didn't account for what were the critical paths, what were the critical factors and failing points. And so I didn't account for them. I didn't identify them. And more importantly, I didn't pay attention to them as they were coming along. So what I hope to bring forward, and one of the things that I teach about, this notion of critical path decision making isn't something I invented. It was taught to me a long time ago as I was beginning to cut my teeth as a project manager. And so it kind of sounds and feels a little bit project managery, but that's not really what this is. This is about how you're going to, as an entrepreneur, and with all the pressures, all the concerns, all of the life that comes at us and that we're trying to direct, and how to go about identifying what things to decide on that are on that critical path and which ones are distractions. And for the ones that are critical path, how can you refine them? How can you really hone in on those, have time for them, and be able to execute on those? So let's get into our presentation. Let's take a look at this first slide here. Oh, next slide, please. Well, while we're dealing, there we go. All right, perfect. So the decision-making process, right? Everybody makes decisions in a very super clean way. Maybe not. But here's how it's supposed to work. When you look at the decision-making process, there's been many analyses, and whether you look at one that has 7 steps, 5 steps, 12 steps, whatever it might be, all decision-making kind of goes through this similar kind of process. Whether, when you identify the decision that needs to be made, gather some information, you identify some alternatives, you weigh that evidence, ultimately you take a choice, you take some action, and then you review what happens on the back end as a result of this. Now, fundamentally, yes, this is the process that the human mind goes through to take decisions. And it could take seconds, a matter of seconds. It could take many, many months. Some people, sometimes you get stuck at the gather information stage, that analysis paralysis, as we've heard sometimes. Sometimes fear gets in the way here. of weighing the evidence and what do you believe, what do you not believe, whose expertise should you go with or not. And some people have what's known as the buyer's remorse or the decision-taking remorse, where, okay, you've taken an action and now you start second guessing yourself and thinking, oh, was that really the way to go? And I just don't know. We all go through that. Every single one of us. You would be inhuman if you didn't. You'd be a machine, right? So, but we all go through this process. The reality, though, let's take a look at this next slide of how it seems to actually look. It tends to look a little more like this. This is what it feels like, right? If decision making were as crisp and clean and linear as that last slide indicated, I imagine decisions would be quite a bit more straightforward. So in this jumble of data, in this jumble of opinions and thoughts and experiences and things we've done before that we don't want to repeat, or things that we want to make sure go just right, or decisions that we want to wait on until the conditions are absolutely perfect before we go, or the opposite end of that spectrum of taking a decision before you even have any real rudimentary evidence of information. This is the jumble. This is the mind as we feel it. Let's take a look at this next slide. What can we do about this? So one of the things we can do about it, you can continue to go with gut feel. There's lots of people that operate on gut feel, and that's just the way they're gonna run their world, run their life. Cool. I mean, some people it works out for them that way, right? For me, no, I've tried that a few times, and well, I'll point to the first story I left you with earlier as evidence of what happens. Instead, I've discovered for myself, maybe you'll discover for yourself, that taking a systematic approach based on what do you intend. Now, none of us have perfect future vision. Nobody knows the future, as far as I know. No one can look into the future and see exactly what's going to happen. But we have intentional outcomes, or outcomes that we intend to have happen. The good news is that these outcomes, these activities, kind of plans that drive these activities and the goals that we want to achieve, they're all measurable. So we can start seeing, sometimes over a brief period of time, sometimes it takes a longer period of time, really what's working and what's not working, and what kinds of outcomes you're experiencing. The other good bit of news, as I mentioned earlier, you're not alone. There are many analogies and many people with similar kinds of situations, businesses, decisions to take out there. There are volumes and volumes of books that have been written, blogs, professional speakers. I mean, there's just an enormous universe of information of people that look and feel just like what you're dealing with. Everybody's unique, but you can, if you pay attention, you can kind of see some similarities. You can see some patterns that emerge, and you can rely on how those go. But let's talk about being systematic a little bit. Well, if all we do is base everything off of outcomes, well, when are we going to get a chance to dream? When are we going to get a chance to really envision what we're trying to achieve? And not just professionally, but personally, maybe philanthropically, maybe all sorts of ways that you want to impact your own life and the life of others. So dreams are important. And when you write those dreams down, here's kind of the critical part. Once you start writing some of these dreams down and make them goals, now you've got a direction. You've got a direction that you want to go in, something that you're trying to achieve. To achieve those goals, though, you need to have plans. and make plans and execute on plans with activities that are geared towards achieving that plan. There's lots of times I've seen people fall into this trap. I've fallen into this trap myself, where you just kind of think that being busy is going to get you to where you need to be. And if you're not busy, then you're not doing enough. If you're not overwhelmingly busy, I don't put a whole lot of merit into that, because there are valuable activities. There are those that help you achieve your plan and your goals. And there are those that distract you and take you away from it. So it's those outcomes that really become critical. Here's some examples of activities, right? Everybody's got calls they need to make, meetings to attend, some form of organizing to conduct, some kind of follow through, but the list goes on and on. When you consider in your own life, in your own business, the number of things and the different number of things to do, it can be overwhelming quickly. So being able to systematically work through those becomes critical. Let's take a look at this next slide. So an important question comes up. Of all those activities in your universe that you're currently conducting, that you know you need to do, that you wish you could do, which ones do you need to do, in what order, and for how long? So when we consider that path of dreams written down become goals, goals with, creating plans that will achieve those goals, and what activities based on what outcomes. Well, I think one of the best ways to start is to work backwards. Work backwards from that larger goal. Where is it you're trying to go? Because those are your compass headings. If you're trying to get to some point on the north end of the map, going southwest might not be your best starting point. Right? Sometimes you do have to zig and zag and make those movements. But by having those goals down, what's that larger goal? Okay, now you at least have a compass heading. Then creating those plans, writing things. And for me, I don't know about you, but whether you do it on a whiteboard, whether you do it on a PowerPoint, whether you do it on a board of some kind, writing things down has a special impact. So create the plans for those goals that are going to step you there. Now, it's not going to be one plan. You've got to create a series of plans, because having too big of a plan, there's no problem with having a large goal, large dreams, massive dreams, having a great goal. But if the plans are too difficult to digest, if they're too hard to break down and really figure out which step you're on, you're going to get lost. And getting lost is just like trying to go north and you start heading in the wrong direction. So having those plans that step you towards those goals. Structuring activities that achieve the goals. So breaking them further down. Breaking them down into smaller and smaller elements so that the activity is going to lead towards the goal. And measuring the effectiveness. So measuring the outcome of what you intended from that activity. And if the outcomes aren't resulting in what you intended, change it. Don't be afraid to change the structure of your activity so that you can get to your goal. One more slide, please. So how do you figure out in this process of what is critical path and non-critical path? What's going to distract you from where you're trying to go? It's going to get you off track. Well, One of the first things to do is to differentiate the different kinds of categories of activities. So some activities are revenue generating. Keep those in a pile. Keep those kind of in a little bucket. Profit increasing. What makes you more profitable, more efficient in delivering on that revenue? Don't forget the people building. Who do you need to surround yourself with? Whether it's employees, strategic partners, or just people in your network, remember to build people as well. Um, Maybe some of it is distribution or supply chain for you. How do you get this out? How do you receive what you need in order to create what you're going to put out there? As boring as it may be, let's remember the accounting and finance side. Let's make sure that we're keeping track of numbers in the way they need to be tracked and accounted for correctly. And then administrative. Let's remember the paperwork. Let's remember the filings. Let's remember those kinds of things. This is just a brief list. This is not exhaustive. And for you, you may have more categories. You may have warehousing you need to worry about. Maybe you have transportation elements you need to worry about. Technology concerns, right? So, but there's lots of categories. Create those categories so that you know which of those buckets your activity is going to go into, and what kind of outcome are you looking for out of each of those activities. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, and one more thing I should say about that last one. If there are some types of activities that don't move you forward in your goal, in your plan, maybe you can kind of move those down to the bottom. And that doesn't mean that they're not important. And by no means should you ignore your own needs, right? Your health, your family, all of those components. That all comes into this as well. So I don't want to trivialize it. And those personal and family and community needs, philanthropic needs, those all strengthen you so that you are more likely to hit your goal and energize you for your activities. But you want to differentiate between which ones move you forward and which ones are kind of holding you back. So let's take a look at an example. This is just one of the many examples of intended outcomes. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So what are the outcomes needed based on the goal set? So in this case, we're talking about a revenue goal. We're talking about a goal of generating a certain amount of revenue just for this year, just calling it X. So the plan in this case to get there is how many sales per quarter, per month, per week, and per day to hit that revenue figure. Then, in order to hit those figures, well, how many calls are needed? How many meetings do you need to make? How many follow-ups are needed to make the plan? And then the outcome, does the combination of the selling techniques you're using and these activities, does it result in one sale or the number of sales that need to be made? And if not, what changes are needed? This is that, reviewing and evaluating. If they are, well, what improvements can you make for the next go around? This pattern is something you can apply to team building. It's something you can apply to hires, something you can apply to marketing or profitability, operations, right? So it's a very generic kind of pattern that you can reproduce and put into lots of applications based on the kinds of activities, the types of activities that are important to you. Let's go on to our next slide. How do you fit all this in? Well, as Jenny mentioned, last week I spoke about time blocking. And so I'd encourage you, go back to that, take a look at how to time block. But as a reminder, there's only 24 hours in a day, and you really do have to sleep for at least two of them, or you start having problems. So, in order to fit in these activities and the activities that you want to have, the ones that are going to help you with your critical path process, you need to be able to time block for this so that you don't find yourself now burning time on activities that don't help you. So let's focus on these activities that are going to achieve the intended outcomes. Now that means that you have to be able to say no to the ones that take away from the intended outcome. That's hard to do. It's a lot harder to do. And for some of you that are starting to take up this time blocking practice, you're starting to discover it's hard to say no, a lot harder than you ever thought. But let's apply this example from the last slide. Okay, so we want our year-end revenue. I'm just picking a number arbitrarily, of $1.2 million for the year, for a 12-month period. That means that if we're going to hit that mark on a regular basis, we're going to sell $100,000 per month. We break that down a little further, $25,000 per week, $5,000 per day. Okay, so we've broken it down. In our example, in this sale, you make $10,000 per sale. So simple math, $100,000 in revenue for the month, we need 10 sales. But it's a 50% close ratio. That means you need twice as many prospects in order to be able to hit your mark. So sales required 10 touch points. And touch points is another topic for another day, but that means you're reaching out to them for calls and visits and emails and different ways of connecting and having a touch point with your prospect. So it needs, in this case, it takes, to close a sale, it's at least 10 touch points. To hit 10 sales per month, well, those 10 sales needed 10 touch points each, but we needed 20 prospects. So now we're talking about 200 touch points in the month in order to meet our revenue goal, our sales goal. Some of you at this point are starting to gloss over. I get that. It's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of numbers. It feels overwhelming. But once you start time blocking, and I'll show you my example here in just a minute of how long, you need to think through what works best for you. How long of a call do you need? What kind of email do you need to send? What kind of meeting do you need to be in order to have an effective touch point that leads you towards that sale? This process, and again, we're going to get into a real life example here in just a minute, but this is a similar kind of process that you can do for all other kinds of activities. You need to break it down into their core parts so that you know how much time you need to allocate in the time blocking for you to be able to fit it all in. Otherwise, it's going to feel to you like it's overwhelming and you can't possibly get this done. Or as you're trying to show others to follow in your footsteps, your first employees, or the first hires you make for sales or any other function, they have a very difficult time figuring it out on their own. But if you can get it, and if you can be disciplined to it, it'll pay off. Let me show you in this next slide. So again, this is the example I used last week. When you time block your day so that some segments of this are dedicated for certain functions, whether that's marketing, outreach, uh, optimizing some of your time. This particular day happens to be set for uh, outbound marketing, outbound touch points of reaching out and following up with prospects. So this day is geared towards that. You can break up your days and time block your days into different segments based on what you need to achieve. So some of these segments on some days might have more of an operational or an administrative time, or paying attention to the books, right? You can time block and break up your days into the activities that are most critical, that are going to be important and effective. Let's take a look at the next slide. Where to begin? Again, I know it can feel overwhelming. It can seem kind of daunting. So let's break it down a little bit. In the first week, pick one type of goal. So, whether it's revenue, whether it's operational, whatever it is. But let's remember one of the greatest cliches ever created: keep them SMART. That means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, giving yourself a deadline. So break those goals down, great, and the plans to achieve those goals, so that you're able to be specific. If you can't articulate, and I always love using the analogy of try explaining it to a young child, or explaining it to your mom, or explaining it to someone that has very little knowledge of what you do. And if you can be succinct in what your plan is, in describing it to them, and they can get it, then you've got a specific plan. Measurable? Okay. Well, how are you going to measure what that plan is supposed to achieve? Is it a dollar figure? Is it a certain amount of new customers? Is it some new profitability figure? New number of hires? I mean, just however you're going to measure, but mark those down. Achievable. So that's kind of being the realistic part of it. For that, that's a very kind of dependent type of marker. Is it achievable? Well, look around you. Look at the models that maybe others have done. Get some advice. Get some professional advice. Friends and family are not necessarily the best sources of advice, but getting some professional advice, getting some professional consultation is a good idea for something like that. Relevant. Is that plan truly relevant to what you're trying to achieve? Or is it a distraction? So this is the first layer of, is it critical path or not critical path? And then time bound. Does it have a deadline to it? Does it keep you accountable? And another part of that achievable element, and working with someone, getting some professional advice, it's having someone that's going to keep you accountable to that plan. That's one of the biggest advantages to it. So as you go through that for this one goal, and remember, you're starting with one type of goal here. What SMART activities are going to align to that plan? And what outcomes do you need to see for each of those activities? What do you intend out of each of those? And then time block it. Time block it so that you dedicate and focus and stay disciplined to the time necessary to do that activity. Let's go on to the next week. In week 2, you need to review the outcomes. So did it pan out the way you expected it to? Did each of those outcomes, did they hit the intended mark? Did they fall short? Maybe they went way over? Just let's take a look at that. And what adjustments are needed going into the second week? And remember, you're still focused on one type of goal, one type of goal. So that way you're not trying to introduce too many variables at once. Question to ask yourself in this review process: did you remain disciplined to the time blocks, or did you just kind of start wandering all over the place? Um, when you time block for week 2, focus on the ones that were effective. So if something didn't quite work, if it was an ineffective activity, it just didn't meet the intended outcome, try working without that particular activity and focus on the ones that were effective. And then increase or decrease the time for those smart activities based on the results. So if something was really effective and you can do more of that, do a little more of that. Take time away from the ones that weren't as effective. At the end of this week, the second week, you're going to time block for your third week for what's coming up. So you're starting to look ahead very intentionally for what adjustments and what outcomes you need. All right, let's go on to that next week. As you start getting into week 3, you're going to see patterns emerging. You're going to pay attention. You're going to see that these kinds of activities really hit their mark every time. And if I increase a little more of that, I get even more of that intended outcome. These others, they just kind of seem to burn time. They don't really seem to get me where I'm going. They don't advance us in our plan. So continue to make those small adjustments. You're staying focused still on that one type of goal. Continue to time block. You're going to see those patterns as you review for yourself in the week. Repeat more of the ones that are most effective. And now, as you come into the end of week 3, start forecasting the following week. So make a forecast for yourself of what the end of week 4 should look like. Because you're starting to see those patterns, you can start to forecast a little bit. And by the time we come into week 4, let's go ahead and come out to week 4. By the time you get into week 4, then you're going to see, here in this next slide, you're going to see really which ones have been the most effective over this last month. Which ones have been moving you towards the achievement of your plan for that one particular type of activity, that one particular type of goal. So now you've got a
You know what, Javier, we're not able to hear you for some reason. I thought it was just my computer at first, but then I heard from Lenita, it sounds like she is not able to hear as well. Let's see if
oh
it's,
no,
oh, there we go.
okay,
You're back. We time blocked you
yeah.
back in. Go ahead, take it away.
So now that the patterns have emerged, and now that you're able to compare what actually happened in week 4 compared to the forecast you made at the end of week 3, really, how close are you? How effective is your forecasting? And now you can start to apply this, being disciplined, but you can start to apply this to other categories. Now, there's the question that comes up frequently in this. Is it possible to simply do multiple categories at one time? Well, technically, the answer is yes. But because you're trying to create a behavior of discipline for yourself, now it really becomes difficult to stay disciplined when you're trying to do too much at one time. And for most of you listening, some, if not all, of what we've talked about it's been very straightforward. It's been logically how things should work. Common sense, right? There's that kind of word. It's common sense. But if you haven't practiced it, it's hard. So that's why I encourage you. For the first month, do one and then build out from there. It's kind of like trying to take on a new workout routine, right? It can be overwhelming. Let's go to the next slide. So the reality is, as you practice this, it's this process that identifies your critical path. So rather than trying to say and guess and chart your critical path ahead of time, this process is what helps you identify and find what path, what activities, plans, and goals are most critical for your achievement. Remaining disciplined. That's absolutely the most critical element of this. Staying disciplined to those activities, to that time blocking. Make adjustments as those patterns emerge, but as you adjust, reapply the process so that you're not just kind of starting to fly off track. And ultimately, beware of those distractions. Beware of those non-critical activities. Pay attention to your health, pay attention to your family, pay attention to self. Those are all critical. So don't discount them. But if there are activities that are surrounding you, coming at you, and as entrepreneurs, there's a lot of that comes at us. There are a lot of demands of us in many different ways because you're the entrepreneur. Just it's a special environment to live in. So making those choices will determine your results. This has been my time. Thank you very much. Let's put up that last slide so that people know how to reach me. Quick bit, Business Rising, we're the one-stop shop for all things facilities. That means that a decision maker, a facility manager, a property manager, a business owner can focus on their business. Let us focus on everything that place of business needs. We'll take care of that for them. Thank you so much. I'm Javier Hernandez with Business Rising.
That's amazing, Javier. And I'm guessing people can just put their phone up to the QR code, right? And it'll take them to the website.
Exactly right. Or find us on the website. You can find me on the website anytime. You'll have the contact information via these slides as well. So yes.
You're like a menu at a restaurant. The QR code. It's perfect. It's convenient. I love it. You've gotten some great compliments. Somebody saying that you have been the favorite speaker so far. So kudos to you. I hope you feel good about that. And we've got a lot of questions. This one was a really excellent question from the group and from the audience, and kind of going back earlier on in the speech when you were talking about following up, taking time to follow up with people and to make those phone calls to build your business. What do you have to say about how much is too much when it comes to calling somebody and following up when you're trying to do business with them? Is there like a golden rule? There's so many different nuances to it. Take us through that process.
So a couple of important things here. That's a great question, by the way. So one side of it is when it comes to the sale and the follow-up. One of the things that we've discovered over many, many years of sales management is that the average sale is made at or after the fifth call, the fifth touch point. Most people, especially inexperienced salespeople, will give up after one or two tries, but it's not until the fifth one at least. Now, what we also know is that you need to pay attention to how your customer wants to receive you. So if your customer needs to hear from you because their decision-making process is monthly, then following up with them at least 5 times within that month is going to be a critical path to them remembering to buy from you. Otherwise, all you've done is reminded them to buy something, but it might not be yours. So you need to understand your customer and realize 1, 2, or 3 times is simply not enough. It really takes at least 5. I recommend, and Coca-Cola as a brand the number three typically recognized brand on the planet. Their global marketing plan says that every human being on the planet every day should see, taste, smell, hear, or in some form or fashion experience Coca-Cola 8 times every single day. And a lot of studies have shown, personal experiences backed it up, that when I reach out to my customers based on what their buy cycle is, spread out at least 8 times, they tend to remember me and they're going to buy from me.
Okay, that's really helpful. Now, here's kind of a follow-up on this. Were you done, Javier? I didn't want to cut you off.
Yep.
Okay, great. So she's saying she hates when folks keep calling her when she says, I'll get back to you. Like you call somebody and you say, hey, I wanted to meet with you about this. They say, yes, I'll get back with you. Then they never do. What do you do in that scenario?
So, an important thing about how the human brain is wired to receive information on those 5, 8 touch points, whatever you want to use for your customers, is that you have to mix it up. So, you have to, you can't do more than 2 of the same kind of activity before you start getting blocked by that receiver. So, a phone call followed by an email, followed by a meeting, followed by something, piece of mail, and then you repeat the process, or maybe a couple of emails and a phone call, a meeting and a couple of follow-up pieces. You have to mix it up because what they're telling you in I'll get back to you is I'm tired of hearing from you in this way. It's not that they're tired of hearing from you, they're tired of hearing from you in the same way.
Okay, so you're like trying to get more, like, do you try to bump into them somewhere, or you email instead of call, or you send a voice memo instead of a call, or a text instead of a call? It just has to
Social
be
media, yeah. Yeah,
okay.
so you have to intentionally create ways of having a touch point. So you're intentionally creating touch point opportunities. And then you're going to track those out, path those out, time block for them, and send those out. And a touch point doesn't have to be, hey, remember that thing that I tried to sell you last month that I'm still trying to sell you?
Okay.
It doesn't have to be that at all. A touch point can absolutely be, hey, I was just thinking about you. Hope you're having an awesome day. Hey, I heard, hey, it's your birthday coming up. Here's a little Chick-fil-A gift card. Um, I saw that maybe you're connected with them on social media, or that they have an interest in particular kinds of activities. Hey, I saw that's this event coming up at the convention center. Thought you might just want to be aware of it. Uh, or even the ones that say, hey, it's tax season coming up. Make sure you schedule your tax time. And you're not doing your taxes with me. It's just, hey, remember your taxes. Right?
Mm.
So those helpful things, those are touch points. And I don't get tired of hearing from someone who's feeding different types of touch points instead of bye, 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 bye.
Well, Javier, it sounds like you're telling us to be good people, right? To be good citizens of the world, to be kind, to be friendly, to be, build relationships just like we would in any other way, even if we had nothing to gain from it. That's what I'm picking up from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. And be systematic about it. Because when you're systematic about it, then you're able to do those things. You're doing those things to be a good person, but there's nothing wrong with being profitable while you're being good. So you can be systematic, put those things out there, and benefit from it, whether it's your business, whether it's your not-for-profit, whatever you're engaged in doing, and be systematic about it. Be systematic about being a good person.
Yeah, yeah. So if I'm understanding correctly, it's not like one day, because if we're following the session from last week, and you guys, I'm telling you, if you missed last week's, it's definitely worth getting the replay. It's on Sarah's YouTube channel, which we'll post at the end of this session. It's worth going through and really learning about that time blocking. And even if you're somebody like me who's done it before, it was so helpful to be reinvigorated with that. So what that does for you, if I'm sort of clarifying here, instead of on Monday when you wake up and you're like, oh man, that client ordered once and they haven't ordered again, then bombarding them on LinkedIn and a text and a voice memo and a flower to the house, you're saying, okay, this Monday I'm going to send the email. Next Monday, I'm going to send something else, or maybe comment on a LinkedIn post or something. Then the following Monday, it may be something different. Is that right?
Exactly. So whether it is, and again, you have to know your customer. What is their buy cycle like? Because yeah, if they buy once every 6 months, yeah, you can space those out and remain on top of mind over time. If they buy once a month, buy once a week, well, yeah, you need to compact that a little more so that they remember you. The whole, this wasn't intended to be a marketing session, but the whole reason marketing exists is to remain top of mind so that someone remembers you. Well, by bringing this out and spacing it and understanding not just your customer and their buy cycle, but how about when it comes to training your employees and helping them understand new material? You don't want to burn your employees out by just bombarding them with class after class after class and just pounding something down their throats. You need to space that out, give them opportunity to apply it and digest it and internalize it. Um, Same thing with your operational elements and your administrative and just all of the aspects of things we have to do. You have to understand what is their cycle. Now, the good news is, as I mentioned, the process helps you identify what the cycle is so that you can get better at it for yourself, for your own particular activities and plans.
Javier, how did you get started in business?
Well, so um, coming out of school, coming out of University of Houston, when I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and then I went to go clerk for some lawyers, and I realized the last thing I wanted to be was a lawyer. But I needed to get into something, and I discovered technology. I discovered a little software company that was willing to take a risk on me because I wasn't qualified to change a light bulb at this company, much less be part of this technology world. But I did know customer service pretty well because I'd worked retail throughout my youth and throughout my college life. So they hired me. I got involved in this little startup. I was employee number 12, and I fell in love with the entrepreneurial environment, the roller coaster, and everything else. And from there, I went on to work for some very large companies. I was trained as a project manager. I got mentored in some very extraordinary ways. And then one day I had to, while working for a large consulting firm, I had to fire the employees of one of our clients because the client had simply decided to close their doors. And it broke my heart. It really was catastrophic to me. And I decided at that moment that I needed to have more decision-making power in who my customers would be. So I went out on my own, and that was my first. That was going out on my own with a little boutique consulting practice and starting up companies thereafter.
Once you went out on your own, did you ever go back to working? I guess in theory, we all work for somebody, right? But did you ever
So
go back to working at a large business or corporation where you had like a standard structure boss, or once you left, were you on your own from then on?
yeah, I like to call it traditional job. No, I
Exactly.
haven't gone. I personally have not gone back to traditional job simply because I find the entrepreneurial world so challenging. Um, yes, so of those 300 plus customers that are in my introduction in my bio, they're my bosses. They've all been my bosses. My current customers, they're my bosses. The people that I'm responsible to, partners, employees, and contractors that I work with, I'm responsible to them. And so they're my bosses. The fact that, a bank account happens to be opened by me versus someone else's, it's the same responsibility.
A lot of people on here already have their own businesses. Some are considering doing it. Some are working in what you would call those traditional jobs. And I've learned that over the time of moderating these based on the questions that people ask. Is there anything that you think, okay, when it comes to decision making and somebody's deciding, okay, I want to go out on my own, is there like a set of qualities that make somebody more likely to enjoy that entrepreneurial type of work?
Wow. So it's very unpredictable. There's been many surveys out there. I think Harvard Business Review has done this a few times where they survey people that have launched a business and now they're kind of on the back end of it. And the question is, would you do it again? About 70% of respondents say no, they wouldn't do it again, just because of whatever experience they went through. And there's multiple studies that are pretty similar to that. As far as characteristics, well, I like to say, and I like to ask people to consider what is driving your passion. If you think that you're going to start a business because you're going to make a lot of money, that is almost guaranteed failure. So don't do it for that reason. If you think you're going to do it because you're going to have all this freedom and all this time and you can relax and you're going to be able to tell people what to do, that's also going to be very likely a high likelihood of failure. Really, it has to do with what is the passion that drives you. And if you could, in a perfect world, not worry about money and not worry about status, but do what you love, then if you can do that, in a traditional job, do that. If you want to do that pursuing your own venture, then do that. But it really has to be the level of passion, because when it gets hard, and it will get hard, and everything starts, feeling like it's coming in on you, that passion, that why you do it, that's what has to drive you through it. So that's the thing to look for, is do you have a strong enough why, a strong enough passion to get you through that? And then otherwise, everything else you can learn. You can surround yourself with great bookkeepers and planners and strategists and technologists, and you can surround yourself with all of that, whether they're hires or partners or anything else. But that passion has to be there to begin.
It's an interesting combination to find somebody who has the passion but also has the structure. And I guess that's where your time blocking comes in, and your decision making, and your making a SMART goal, the SMART, sort of set of rules or things to follow. Is this something that you revisit every month, every 6 months, every year, when it comes to those goals that you're setting for yourself, or that we could be setting for ourselves?
Yes, and you have to. It would be like achieving a fitness goal and then not going back to that level of discipline and diet and exercise and all those kinds of things. It's you hit it one time and then it slowly sloughs off. Same thing happens with these disciplines. And I have to credit the mentors I received early in my career learning how to be a good project manager, because those are the disciplines that I carry with me in every stage.
Javier, you're awesome. You've been getting a lot of people say they're very easy to understand, very easy to learn from. So I hope that you are just feeling the praise that people are putting out there for you today. And I want to remind everybody, he's generously shared his information. Use it wisely. So the website there is businessrising.com. It's in the chat right now if you want to copy that and paste it somewhere. And then also J Hernandez at businessrising.com. And then of course the website businessrising.com. And I saw Regina, you asked that question. So right there in the chat, just scroll up a little bit and you'll be able to get it. Javier, thank you so much. You were wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Don't forget, everybody, subscribe to Sarah's YouTube channel. These are resources that are available to all of us each and every week. I look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place. The YouTube channel is in the chat right now. And then Sarah's website is there as well. And there's also a wealth of resources on that website. All right, have a great week, everybody. And I will see you next week. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.